Hi everyone, we are working on the Math HiSet Practice Test FPT 7 and we're on question number 8, which is using a couple of graphs. It says the graphs below show the total value in US dollars of imports and exports of country W with its only 3 trade partners, countries X, Y, and Z in a recent year. And then we see the two graphs. We've got the value of imports and we've got the value of exports. So you need to make sure that your students understand that there are two different things here. Imports, that's what's coming into the country. Exports is what's going out of the country. Along the bottom, we've got the 3 countries that country W trades with. And along the side over here, we've got the number of dollars in millions that the imports and exports are worth. So what we need to find out is, let's go to the question, what percent of country W's total imports was from country X? So we have to look and see what their total imports were. And to do that, we go to the calculator. I had already done the calculations for that, but I'm going to do it again. So their imports from all 3 countries will be their total. From country X, they had 40. From country Y, they had 80. And from country Z, they had 40. So they had a total of $160 million is what their total amount of imports was. Okay? What we need to figure out now is how much of that was coming from country X. Okay? This is what we call a part to a whole. Country X was only 40 million out of 160 million, which gives us 0.25, which is the same thing as 25%. You need to be able to teach the students how to move from decimals to percentages pretty quickly so that they can do that math. So let me show it to you again. $40 million out of, which it means divided by, 160 is the percent of the imports from country X, and it's 25% or 0.25. So that is how you would work number 8. Super simple, won't take them very long, which is a good thing because number 9 is awful. Number 9 is going to require your students to know several different things, okay? Go ahead and prepare them for this because this question is a beast of a question, and it's one of those things that they're going to have to memorize a formula that is not anywhere to be found on their formula sheet. Okay, so get them into the mode of thinking that there are just some things that they're going to have to memorize. The question is, what is the solution to 3x squared minus 2x plus 4 equals 0? Now, if you remember, the very first question had to do with a function of x, and it was something that we set up equal to 0, and we were able to solve it pretty simply. This one, not so much. With this particular question, students are going to have to understand a few things. The first thing they're going to have to understand is what's called the quadratic formula. Okay? The quadratic formula is this beast right here. Okay? And it corresponds to an equation that is written like this. And you've seen this format before because that's what we used for question number 1. The other thing they need to understand is they need to know what imaginary numbers are. Okay? So an imaginary number is what happens when you have a square root of a -1. Imaginary numbers are not numbers that don't exist, but they are numbers that the definition of them if I could go back, they're numbers that, according to Wikipedia, it's a complex number that can be written as a real number multiplied by an imaginary unit. This is pre-calculus, okay? So unless your students are really planning to study math in the future and they're planning to go to college and study calculus and pre-calculus, the concept behind imaginary numbers is not going to be as important to them as it would be, for someone who would be studying calculus and pre-calculus. So we have to be able to understand these two things to be able to figure out this problem. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this all down and see what we can do to solve the problem. Okay. We have the formula or the equation format of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And that is exactly what our question was written as. The question itself was 3x squared minus 2x plus 4 equals 0. Okay, that was what the original question was. Now I want you to look at a couple of things here. I want you first of all to look at the B and the B. Okay, all of those things correspond to this right here, the -2. So keep that in mind. I also want you to look at the A. The A, let me change colors. The A is right here, and it's right here, and it's right here, and it corresponds to a +3. Okay, so keep those things in mind because all of this stuff does correspond to each other. It's just extremely complicated unless you've learned the quadratic formula. Now the last thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at the C, which is right here, and it's right here. Okay, so now what we have is everything that we need in theory to be able to solve this problem. So I'm going to rewrite it like this, except I'm going to use these numbers in place of what you see here. Okay, so we have x equals negative, our b is a -2, so I'm going to put in, I really wanted to do that in yellow because I want to keep it where you can see everything. So let me go to yellow. Okay, -2. All right, that is our b. Plus or minus, because it can be a positive or a negative, so plus or minus the square root of b squared. This was our b again. We're going to square it minus 4 times a, and our a was a 3, times c, and our c was a 4. Okay, so far so good. We have all of this written exactly the way it's written up here. Now let's do the bottom part of the equation, and the bottom part of the equation is 2 times a, which is 3. Okay, now You remember, of course, the rule of math, which is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Okay, so we're looking at parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. So what we're going to have to do with this is we're going to take it a piece at a time. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and do these parentheses here because I like to deal with parentheses first. So I've got these parentheses, I've got this parentheses, and I've got this one here also. So keep all of that in mind as we're working next, okay? So what we're going to have next is we're going to have negative times -2, which is going to give us a +2. So I'm going to write that over here. We're going to keep the plus or minus. Square root we're going to keep. Now, -2 squared. 2 squared gives us a 4. -2 squared gives us a +4 because a negative times a negative gives us a positive. So we have a 4 right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my -4 and multiply it by 3 and get a -12. Your student can be doing all of this on the calculator. -4, well, this calculator won't do the negatives, but anyway, I did not mean to erase that. Okay, 4 times 3 times 4 will give us 48. So what we've got here is 4 minus 48, okay, over 2 times 3, which is 6, okay? So that's what we've got so far. Now we're going to keep on moving with our please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and we're going to take 48 away from the 4. 4 minus 48 gives us a -44. And this is where our problem is really going to come in, okay? So we've got a 2 plus or minus the square root of -44 divided by 6, okay? Now what we're going to have to do with this, I'm going to take it to the other whiteboard. So that you can see what happens here, okay? So what we have is we've got a 2 plus or minus the square root of -44 over 6, okay? Now, the next step with this is that we're going to have to do something with this -44 here. And if you remember back here, I is the square root of -1, and that's going to help us out a lot. And I is equal to the square root of -1. So what we're going to do inside of here is we're going to make a few changes. And instead of this being -44, what we're going to do is we're going to change it to a -1 times a 44, which is perfectly legal. There is nothing wrong with doing that, okay? Now when we do this, what we will end up having is we've got a square root of a -1 now, which is the same thing as an I. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the square root of the -1 and turn it into an I right here, okay? So I'm changing the problem as I'm going, but everything is still legitimate. It's all still the same. I'm almost out of time for this video, so I'm going to pick up the next video right here.